Good morning, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to a special show where I'm going to talk about some of my favorite keyboard players of all time. So we've been kind of doing these every so often over the last few months. My favorite guitar players, my favorite bass players, my favorite drummers. Well, now we're on my favorite keyboard players. So generally what I do is I pick, usually it's about 30 with thereabouts. Kind of went a little bit over here because there's some special guys I wanted to mention. But basically, these are my favorites, right? These are not like the all considered the greatest of all time or, you know, the most influential, and some of them very well might be. But these are the guys who kind of really do it for me. And there's plenty of others that I'm sure I'm not going to mention. So I urge everybody to just go and list your favorites in the comments below, right? So if you don't hear me mention your favorite or favorites, doesn't mean I don't like them. It's just these are the guys who really do it for me, right? Whose style I really like, their use of phrasing, maybe their songwriting skills, or maybe they're particularly great on one particular instrument, right? And they play in a band that I love, or you know, whatever. But these are my favorites, right? So let's get started. They're not really ranked in any order of preference, although more of my close personal favorites are probably at the top of my list, but otherwise there's no real order here. So it was just meant to just kind of have a discussion about them, right? So starting off, I want to give mention to some guys that may kind of fall under the radar for a lot of people, but they're very notable, and I know we're going to have some fans out there. The first guy is a dude named Jurgen Fritz from the German progressive rock band Triumvirate. Okay, Triumvirate were basically almost like the German version of Emerson, Lake and Palmer. So if you're a big fan of ELP and you've not checked out any Triumvirate albums, you really should, because they're pretty damn spectacular. And like I said, it's that same kind of real grandiose progressive rock, mainly, you know, trio. You got your keyboards, bass, and drums. And just this guy used, you know, Hammonds and Moogs and all the usual suspects. Really big, symphonic, you know, just grandiose progressive rock in the, you know, of course, in the 70s, right? Just if you love ELP, check them out. That's all I'll say there. All right, Michael Piniella from Symphony X. I wanted to give some love to some of the more recent guys on my list, and there's actually some really fine keyboard players in like progressive metal. It's a lot more than I'm going to talk about here, but Michael Piniella somewhat gets overshadowed a little bit in Symphony X, you know, by, of course, his bandmate and band leader, Michael Romeo, the guitar player. But those two guys together have done some really magical stuff. And Piniella not only is a great soloist, but he's also great at laying down textures, okay, and colors to the music. And I think he's such an important part of the Symphony X sound. So I did want to give him a mention. Another guy from like a more obscure 70s prog band, Rick van der Linden from Trace. Another band that, you know, if you dig ELP, you'll probably really like. He was also in a band called Exception, which was the kind of the pre-Trace band, and then they put that back together after Trace kind of fell apart. But Rick van der Linden, another guy who, you know, probably also worshipped at the house of Keith Emerson, right? Another definite keyboard player and band to check out. John Tout from Renaissance. So I do have a few like kind of strict piano players for the most part on my list, and I think that if you listen to the early Renaissance records, or the classic Renaissance records, I should say, because he wasn't on those first couple, what a piano player, able to create gorgeous symphonic melodies that just don't get enough credit. Just a terrific player, and such majesty in all of his work. Just such an integral part of that band Renaissance. I did want to give him a mention. Steve Porcaro from Toto. You know, all the Porcaro brothers were amazingly talented at their own instruments. And I think, you know, while David Paich, another fine player, mostly played piano in Toto, all of the kind of, you know, Hammond organ and the various synths and things like that, done by very quietly, I might add, by Steve Porcaro. An amazing player who, you know, was one of the few guys in the band who didn't sing. He just kind of let his fingers do the talking. And I think his keyboard work is such an important part of all those great Toto records. I did want to give him a mention. As well as a guy named David Greenslade, all right, from Coliseum, as well as his own band Greenslade. Another very important guy on the early, mid-70s progressive rock scene. Guy who also was very adept at Hammond organ and mellotron and various different types of synthesizers that were available back in that time. Very, very good player. Again, not a mainstream name, but very important part of that early UK prog scene, without a doubt. Another guy also from the same scene, Mike Ratledge from Soft Machine. That guy could play the Hammond organ and the I'm forgetting the name. The Lowry organ, I believe. He was a big proponent of that. And this guy, he liked to attach effects to his organ sounds. So you would a lot of times hear his just soaring solos with a little bit of fuzz or other kind of effects added to it. And he could get really aggressive when he wanted to. His sound was such an important part of those early Soft Machine records, and what really set them apart from a lot of the other bands from the Canterbury scene. And he had a very cool kind of free jazz style to him. Really, really great player. Jens Johansson, great Swedish keyboard player. First burst on the scene with Yngwie Malmsteen's Rising Force. Also later played with Dio and Stradivarius, the power metal act. He currently right now is playing the keyboards in Ritchie Blackmore's new version of Rainbow. I'm not sure how much that is a kind of still existing act at this point. It's kind of on hiatus again. But he was handpicked by Ritchie to be the keyboard player in the most recent incarnation of Rainbow. A terrific soloist, a hell of a nice guy as well. Wanted to make sure he got a mention. So what else we got here? And remember, this list is going to incorporate guys in rock and metal and jazz fusion. So it's going to be kind of all over the map here. Joe Zawinul originally made his mark in the early version of the Miles Davis group in the late 60s and early 70s. And then, of course, that springboarded him to form his own band called Weather Report. Another guy with great compositional skills. Weather Report's fantastic band. Thanks a lot in part to his leadership, his songwriting skills, of course, his great keyboard textures, a lot of electric piano and synthesizers. A very tasty player. Not, he's a little bit different than some of his other contemporaries. He would solo, but he wasn't a guy to go and do 5-minute keyboard solos. He was more about kind of laying the foundation. A lot of jazzy and funky grooves, okay, and lots of colors. Really, really fantastic player. As is Lyle Mays, who just passed away not long ago, from the Pat Metheny group. The Pat Metheny group's music is just, for me, very uplifting, almost kind of spiritual in nature. It's just real feel-good music. And, Pat's got a very melodic guitar style. And I think Lyle Mays, the perfect counterpart to Pat's guitar playing. Mostly piano and electric piano, did play a lot of synths as well, but just really, really soothing sounds, lots of textures, lots of colors, and just really bright soundscapes created from this guy's fingers. I'm telling you, he's going to be greatly missed. Very, very underrated player. One of the kings of the Hammond B3 organ, Jimmy Smith. I'm telling you, go listen to some of those old Jimmy Smith albums. They're absolutely great. Kind of this bluesy jazz and those smoking Hammond B3 tones. Just incredible. The guy that kind of set the bar and trailblazed for everybody that was to follow. Really, really important cat on the jazz scene, and I think a lot of the rock guys who took on playing the B3 and made it their signature, that's where they got all their shit from. Jimmy Smith, amazing guy. Another guy early on the scene, probably also influenced by Jimmy Smith, but also influenced a lot of guys after him, was Brian Auger. Played with a lot of different acts and bands and what have you, but mainly known for Brian Auger's Oblivion Express. Another very cool jazzy, soulful R&B funk rock band. Okay, Brian Auger, tremendous Hammond organ player. Tremendous. Let's go back to some more prog. How about Peter Barden's from Camel? One of the reasons why I love the early Camel stuff so much, and so much more than the rest of their catalog, is basic because of his keyboard sounds. Andrew Latimer, fantastic guitar player, one of the greats. But man, when him and Barden's were together in that band, magic. He was so good, all different kinds of Moog synths and ARPs and Mellotron and Hammond organ, electric piano. He just had this whole arsenal at his disposal that he just managed so well. A tremendous player. Doesn't get enough credit. Steve Walsh from Kansas, mostly known as a singer, right? And one of the best. But Steve was also a fantastic keyboard player. He was a great Hammond organ player. And as well as, synthesizers and various other instruments. And even though like Kerry Livgren did a lot of the synth work also in the band. But even when Kerry left, you had Steve doing it all for the most part. And a very, very fine player who, like I said, doesn't get enough credit for his keyboard work because of his vocals and how outstanding they were, but a very fine player as well. Let's see. Gregg Giuffria. Another very underrated player, I always thought. Made his mark in the band Angel. Added some great prog rock style keyboards to those early Angel records. All right. He also fronted his own band, Giuffria, as well as House of Lords. He's not playing music these days, but man, was he really good. It was a breath of fresh air to kind of like the hard rock and melodic rock scene. Just really big keyboard sounds. Just great master of the synthesizer, right? He was good at Mellotron also. If you listen to those first two Angel records specifically, a lot of great Gregg Giuffria textures and solos and sounds on those. Really, really special guy. As is Greg Rowley. Originally from the first lineup of Santana, and then, of course, many, many years with Journey. He's been doing a lot of solo stuff on his own over the years, but another guy, terrific, old school bluesy Hammond organ guy with a great voice as well. Did not want to forget this guy, even though, to me, his greatness really only on full exhibit on a handful of albums, but I think Patrick Mraz got to be included here. Of course, he played on that terrific Yes Relayer album. I only wish we heard more of him in Yes. He also, of course, was in the Moody Blues for many, many years. Some pretty fine playing in the Moody Blues, too. And he's got some solo stuff and Refugee, what have you, but I think most people remember him as that amazing dude who played on Relayer. I just wish we got another album or two out of him with Yes. I think that would have been absolutely fantastic. Let's see. George Duke. Gotta have George Duke on this list. The master of funkified jazz and rock. Just a great player. Great songwriter. He could kind of fit in almost any situation. Of course, his great stuff in Frank Zappa's classic Mothers of Invention band in the early mid-70s. He, of course, also went on to do some stuff with Stanley Clarke, as well as many fine solo albums. Fit right in with like R&B and soul. Like I said, did Frank's just Mondo Bizarro, rock, jazz, avant-garde combo type of thing. A fantastic player. And, he was, all sorts of, he could do Hammond, the synths, all sorts of clavinet, you name it. He was a master at all, the piano, the whole 9 yards. Eddie Jobson. Eddie, a fantastic musician. Of course, he also kind of came up in Curved Air and Roxy Music. He played with Frank Zappa for a spell. He, of course, helped form UK. Quick spell in Jethro Tull. Lots of solo stuff. An incredible synth player. Really good. I mean, he was like a master at like Moogs and all that sort of thing. All sorts of cool sounds and what have you. And he was also a killer, or I should say he still is, a killer violin player. Just a masterful musician, Mr. Eddie. Let's see. Jan Hammer. Another guy who was just fleet-fingered on the Fender Rhodes electric piano, as well as an assortment of synths. Of course, his playing in the legendary Mahavishnu Orchestra is just absolutely legendary. Done a lot of solo stuff as well. Had his the Jan Hammer group. Hold on while I let Tala out of the room. Tala's like, it's like, Daddy, I'd rather much listen. I hear you talk about guitar players. This keyboard thing is just boring the crap out of me. All right, girl. Sorry. Jan Hammer, yeah, an amazing player, a really good soloist. He was like one of those real speedy guys. And he had a signature sound. It's like you knew when you heard Jan Hammer that it was him. Okay. Where'd I leave off? Don Airey, the guy who has played with everybody. Currently the keyboard ace in Deep Purple with his roaring Hammond organ and synthesizer tones, but he also has played with a who's who of just about everybody. He played with Rainbow. Okay, played with Ozzy Osbourne's Blizzard of Oz, Coliseum 2 alongside Gary Moore. He also played in Gary Moore's band. He's had a quick spell, I believe, in White Snake, and he's played so many other guys and so many other bands that he's done stints with. He's also done plenty of solo things. So a very, very versatile. It's just Don Airey's like one of those guys that's like I think we've kind of took for granted all these years, just how talented and good and important he is. Just look at his resume. There's a reason why he's played with everybody, because he's just always been that in-demand guy. And I think, to replace John Lord in Deep Purple, he was probably the best choice. And he's done so well in that band. All right, Herbie Hancock. Probably, for me, one of the easily top 2 jazz or jazz fusion, jazz funk keyboard players of all time. His work with Miles Davis, legendary, whether it was in that great acoustic Miles Davis group in the mid-'60s, as well as the Miles's move into jazz fusion. Herbie was there on a few of those releases, as well as the Headhunters period and all that sort of stuff, the electro-funk jazz period that Herbie went through, as well as all his more recent solo stuff. Just an amazing, amazing player, whether he's just simply doing it on the acoustic piano or whether he's got his racks of synths and, clavinets and electric pianos and all that kind of stuff. An amazing, amazing player and visionary and songwriter. Can't say enough about Herbie. Same thing about my 2 favorites from kind of that era, especially the jazz fusion era. Chick Corea. I absolutely adore Chick Corea. Again, his early work with Miles Davis, incredible. Those early electric jazz fusion, jazz rock albums, Bitches Brew and all that stuff. Great stuff on there. Of course, his band Return to Forever. Whether it's the more acoustic beginnings or the fully electrified band with Al Di Meola and or Billy Connors, Stanley Clarke, Lenny White, just tremendous, tremendous music there, as well as my beloved Chick Corea Electric Band, who I absolutely love as well, and tons of solo stuff and collaborations with others. I mean, Chick has just done. If you look at Chick's discography, it's absolutely enormous. And again, whether he's just playing the piano, the Fender Rhodes electric piano, all the different Moog synths and ARPs and, he's used everything at all parts of his career. Just an incredible, incredible player, as well as songwriter. His compositional skills are just absolutely top notch. And he always had kind of this Latin flair to his songwriting, which was just impeccable, I think. Let's see, who else we got? Dennis Deyoung. Okay, originally from Styx. Now, Dennis Deyoung Band, another really fine player. A master Hammond organ player, especially on those early Styx albums, then got into doing all the different kinds of synths that were available. Just a really fine player, great soloist, great songwriter, of course, terrific singer. All right. Steve Winwood, originally from the Spencer Davis Group, of course, many albums with Traffic, the big album with Blind Faith, and then, many, many fine solo albums. Another guy who was just an incredible organ player, fine guitar player, great singer. I don't think he gets enough credit for the keyboard textures on the Spencer Davis stuff, as well as those Traffic albums and, Blind Faith and all his solo albums. Just really, really all around. Steve Winwood was just a great all around musician. Could write, could sing, could play guitar, could play keyboards, could do it all. Fine, fine player. Manfred Mann, from, of course, Manfred Mann's Earth Band. Another pioneer on the instrument, Hammond organ, Moog synthesizers, one of the guys who was playing Moogs early on. A lot of those classic Earth Band albums are just killer. Of course, a lot of people remember Manfred Mann's Earth Band for Blinded by the Light, that just tremendous cover version of the Bruce Springsteen song that was arguably better than the original. You can hear all of his cool synth textures on that song, right? Another guy from that same time period, another very influential guy, Rod Argent, from the Zombies and eventually his own band, Argent. Another guy. Played all the instruments, did them well. Hammonds, Moogs, electric piano, Fender Rhodes, Mellotrons, all of them. Gregg Allman, another one of those truly legendary Hammond B3 players. It's just, you can't listen to the Allman Brothers band, especially all throughout their career, without those kind of sultry, smoky tones on the Hammond from Gregg Allman. And he backed it up with some terrific vocals. The guy was a good guitar player too. Didn't often play guitar in the Allman Brothers music because he surrounded himself with so many great guitar players, whether it be his brother, or all the usual suspects, right? Dickie Betts, Warren Haynes, Derek Trucks, Les Dudek, so on and so forth. But much missed, Mr. Gregg Allman. And, the Allman Brothers band were always just as much a part of his vocals and Hammond playing as it was for the guitar licks. Can't have one without the other, right? Richard Wright from Pink Floyd. Got to have Richard on this list, because what Pink Floyd album would be complete without all the different tools that he used to create those haunting sounds, right? You listen to Animals and Wish You Were Here and Dark Side of the Moon, those dreamy keyboards. Maybe not the guy to do all, was never like the soloist that a lot of these other players might have been. But as the guy to create atmosphere and moods, he's the guy you want. He's the guy, had to be in Pink Floyd. Rick Wakeman would not have been good in Pink Floyd. Richard Wright is the guy. Jordan Rudess from Dream Theater. I've gone on record before in saying that I love Jordan Rudess as a player. I kind of prefer Derek Sherinian in Dream Theater a little bit, just because I prefer Derek's style a little bit. But you cannot deny the absolute virtuoso prowess of Mr. Rudess and his songwriting skills. And he is an integral part of Dream Theater. Has been since he joined. So whether you prefer, one over the other, it doesn't really matter. But he is still, I believe, one of the finest keyboard players ever. He's definitely a favorite of mine, okay? And it's got to be on this list. Just think of Jordan Rudess and you think you'd go see them live, and he's got that little swivel part of the stage, right? And he's, got his keyboard rig, goes around and around and around. He's got his little laptop there. It's just, it's typical Jordan, right? Cool player. Vincent Crane from Atomic Rooster. Again, you think of, how much I love the Hammond organ. Can't have a list of favorite Hammond players without Vincent Crane. All those early Atomic Rooster albums, just smoldering, heavy Hammond organ riffs and solos. Another really, really fine player that doesn't get talked enough about. He's another one, may he rest in peace. But yeah, if you haven't listened to Atomic Rooster and you love Hammond organ, heavy, fuzzy Hammond organ, listen to those first couple Atomic Rooster albums. All right, I'm going to mention two guys here that are mainly known as being piano players, but fine ones they are, as well as fantastic songwriters and vocalists who have had so many hit songs and albums over the years. It's just mind-boggling. Billy Joel and, of course, Elton John. And you got to go see them really live to experience just how great both still are on their respective instruments. There's really no finer piano players in kind of pop music than those two guys. And that's always been the case since they both came on the scene. Just fantastic players. Love them both. Kerry Minnear from Gentle Giant. Of course, I had to have him on this list, right? Kerry Minnear and the band Gentle Giant are so unique, unlike anything else. Kerry has a big kind of classical background, and he was able to bring that classical background into this band that incorporated kind of Baroque music and folk and hard rock and blues and jazz into this chamber music, into this thing we call progressive rock, but progressive rock like no other band we'd ever heard before. And again, he was a guy who, if you ever look at any of his live shots of him, he's got every instrument known to man. He's got a Mellotron over here, a Hammond over here, a little mini Moog over here, and a Fender Rhodes over here, and God knows what else. I mean, he incorporated everything. And he was a pretty good cello player, too. So a very, a real virtuoso, and a great songwriter, also pretty good singer, too. Already mentioned him, but I'll mention him again. Derek Sherinian, ex of Dream Theater, currently in Sons of Apollo, currently in Black Country Communion, also had a band called Planet X. He's played with Kiss, played with Billy Idol, played with Yngwie Malmsteen. He's got some solo albums. I mean, he is like Sherinian is like a guitar player who plays every keyboard. he's got like a guitar player mentality. And I love his attack and approach to playing all his various synths and things. He's just, he's got a great composition sense, and I love his over-the-top sounds. He's one of my favorites for a reason. And that's why when I said, no disrespect to Jordan Rudess, who I think is a fine player and I love him, but I prefer if I were to look at the two side by side, I would rather listen to Derek. And again, he's a big Fusion fan too. So I just think, go listen to the Planet X stuff. Tremendous. Anyway, Ken Hensley, Uriah Heep, another amazing guy on the Hammond organ. Also a pretty good guitar player. Also a pretty good singer. He also had stints in Blackfoot and Wasp as well. A lot of great solo albums. But man, his stuff on those classic Uriah Heep albums, tremendous. Speaking of tremendous, how about Rick Wakeman? I mean, what more can you say about the guy? Rick Wakeman is one of the all-time best. One of my all-time favorites. His work in Yes, unbelievable. Those great solo albums. He was flamboyant. He was flashy. He was the man on the Moog, along with a guy I'm going to mention in a minute. And he was a terrific Hammond organ player. He could put down some terrific and creepy mellotron sounds, and he was a phenomenal straight acoustic piano player. Guy can do it all, and he's funny as hell. Tony Banks from Genesis. Some of these other guys that I mentioned might be better soloists than Tony, but I think Tony was the master of creating atmosphere and drama with layers of keyboards, whether it be Hammond or one of the best guys ever on Mellotron. One of the best. Various synths, acoustic piano, electric piano. There is something about the textures created by Tony Banks that I don't think are equaled by any other player. Again, maybe not the most technically gifted player of some of these guys that we're talking about, but it doesn't really matter. He had that sound that was really, really special. All right, my last two. Keith Emerson. Probably, out of everybody we've talked about, probably the guy who had the most true talent. All right, the most amazing gifts. He could just basically do it all. Remember, picture him with that early version of the Moog synthesizer with all the patches and all the chords and all that kind of stuff, and him rocking his Hammond organ back and forth and sticking knives in it, and all this is crazy. I mean, he was just but he could play regular classical piano like nobody else. He just had it all. Probably the most gifted player of all time. He was, a lot of people call him the Jimi Hendrix of the keyboards for a reason. And then sitting at number one for me, he's probably the keyboard player that's kind of really affected me the most throughout my life, is John Lord from Deep Purple. Also spent some time in Whitesnake as well. And, what can you say about John Lord? One of the best Hammond organ players of all time. Again, all those classic Deep Purple albums aren't the same without his Hammond organ tones. Just not the same. Much missed. Miss him so much. Just one of the greats of all time, as a lot of these guys are. So there you have it. That's my list here. Again, you may prefer others, and that's totally cool. And just because I didn't mention your favorite doesn't mean that I don't love them as well. But these are my special guys. I know everybody's got their own special guys. So feel free to list some of your favorite keyboard players and tell us why down below. A lot of fine ones. I think, I could have done a list of 100. That's how many good ones there are out there. But, I want to try and keep it somewhat manageable, so I think this list is about 40 or so. So anyway, visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Of course, we're on YouTube all the damn time. Coming up later today, we are going to rank the studio albums of the Kinks. Coming up in the days ahead, probably sometime next week, I'm going to do my favorite vocalists of all time. So that's coming up as well. What else? Next weekend, we've got ranking the studio albums with my cast of 4 for Merciful Fate. Jack Toledano and I are going to be doing a top 10 songs list of Hammerfall for all you metal fans out there. Plenty of other stuff coming up this week as well, so stay tuned for everything. And of course, tomorrow morning, we've got favorite album of the year for 1979. So all that's coming up in the days ahead, so stay tuned for all that, and we'll see you guys real soon. Take care. Bye-bye.